March 8, 1968, 750 miles northwest of Midway Island, the Pacific Ocean, Soviet submarine K-129 was dying, and no one was watching. At 8:40 hours local time, the Golf II class ballistic missile submarine carrying 98 Soviet sailors and 3 nuclear-tipped R-21 missiles sent its final garbled radio transmission to Pacific Fleet headquarters in Petropavlovsk. The message was incomplete, fragmented, then silence. Captain First Rank Vladimir Kobzar never reported his position, never described the emergency, never called for help. The submarine simply vanished. 3 minutes later, something catastrophic happened. The exact cause remains classified in both Russian and American archives to this day. Some intelligence analysts believe an R-21 missile fuel system ruptured, flooding the missile compartment with hypergolic propellants that ignited on contact. Others point to evidence of a hydrogen explosion in the battery compartment. A third theory suggests the submarine attempted an unauthorized descent from patrol depth, surfacing too rapidly, and flooding through an open hatch. Whatever killed K-129, it happened fast. The crew had no time to send a distress signal, no time to activate emergency systems, no time to save themselves. 2,000 miles to the east, at a classified hydroacoustic listening station buried in the volcanic rock of Adak Island in the Aleutian Chain, U.S. Navy technicians monitoring the sound surveillance system detected something unusual at 0843 hours. A sharp acoustic signature, the unmistakable sound profile of an underwater explosion. The SOSUS array, a network of classified underwater microphones stretching across the Pacific, triangulated the source with precision that would have terrified Soviet naval commanders had they known it existed. The Americans knew exactly where K-129 had died. The Soviets had no idea. 4,000 miles away in Moscow, Soviet Navy headquarters received the first indication something was wrong when K-129 missed its scheduled radio check at 1200 hours GMT. Standard protocol required ballistic missile submarines to transmit encrypted status reports every 6 hours while on patrol. When K-129's transmission window passed without contact, duty officers initially classified it as routine radio malfunction. Submarines operating in deep Pacific waters frequently experienced communication difficulties. By March 10th, after 48 hours of total silence, Pacific Fleet Command escalated the situation to emergency status. Admiral Viktor Digalov, commander of the Soviet Pacific Fleet, personally directed the launch of the largest submarine search operation in Russian naval history. For the next 70 days, the Soviet Navy threw everything they had into the search. Tu-95 Bear reconnaissance aircraft flew grid patterns across 8,000 square miles of open ocean, their magnetic anomaly detectors sweeping the depths for any trace of the submarine's steel hull. A dozen surface vessels crisscrossed the search area, dragging sonar arrays through freezing water. Intelligence ships monitored American naval communications, convinced that if the submarine had surfaced or made contact with U.S. forces, some signal would leak through encrypted channels. Digalov personally commanded operations from the bridge of a Kotlin-class destroyer, studying charts that showed K-129's last known patrol area northeast of Oahu. Every calculation, every tactical assessment, every piece of intelligence pointed to a search zone 300 miles from where the submarine actually lay. They searched in the wrong ocean. Soviet search aircraft flew within 150 miles of K-129's grave. Surface ships passed within 200 miles of the wreckage. Sonar operators listened for acoustic signatures that were already 3 miles too deep for their equipment to detect. The submarine rested at 16,400 feet, far below the maximum detection depth of Soviet sonar systems, its hull crushed by pressure that would flatten a man in milliseconds. By May 15th, after examining every piece of evidence and finding nothing, the Soviet Navy officially declared K-129 lost with all hands. Memorial services were held in Vladivostok and Petropavlovsk. 98 families received condolence letters signed by Fleet Admiral Sergei Gorshkov himself. The submarine was listed in official records as destroyed by unknown causes, possibly collision with an American vessel, possibly internal catastrophic failure. Moscow never found the wreckage, never recovered bodies, never learned what killed their submarine. The official Soviet investigation concluded with a classified report that admitted total failure. K-129 had simply disappeared, swallowed by the Pacific without leaving a trace the Soviet Navy could detect. But in a windowless briefing room on the 6th floor of CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, Director Richard Helms stared at intelligence reports that told a very different story. The Americans knew exactly where K-129 rested. They knew what it carried. 3 R-21 ballistic missiles, each topped with a 1 megaton nuclear warhead capable of striking targets 900 miles away. Soviet codebooks that would reveal encryption systems used across the entire Pacific Fleet. Cipher machines that would unlock months or years of intercepted communications. Torpedo guidance systems, fire control computers. A treasure trove of Soviet military technology sitting on the ocean floor, perfectly preserved in the freezing darkness where nothing decayed. The intelligence value was incalculable. A single Soviet codebook could provide years of strategic advantage. The nuclear missiles themselves would reveal targeting data, launch procedures, and warhead design specifications that would transform American understanding of Soviet strategic capabilities. But there was a problem. The submarine lay at a depth beyond anything American salvage technology had ever attempted. The deepest successful salvage operation in naval history had recovered a hydrogen bomb from 2,850 feet of water off the coast of Spain in 1966. That operation had taken months, cost millions, and required cutting-edge technology pushed to its absolute limits. K-129 lay at 6,400 feet, nearly 6 times deeper, at pressures that would crush conventional salvage equipment like aluminum cans. In one of the most remote stretches of ocean on Earth, far from any support facilities where Soviet surveillance ships could appear at any moment. But the CIA had an advantage the Soviets didn't know about. In July 1968, the deep submergence vehicle USS Halibut departed Pearl Harbor on what official Navy records described as routine hydrographic surveys and acoustic research. The nuclear-powered submarine carried specialized deep ocean cameras mounted on remotely operated vehicles, side-scan sonar arrays capable of mapping terrain in total darkness, and classified oceanographic equipment that had never been used for anything approaching routine operations. Halibut's actual mission was codenamed Velvet Fist. Find K-129. Photograph it. Determine if recovery was even theoretically possible. For 6 weeks, Halibut searched the abyssal plain using coordinates provided by SOSUS listening stations. The search area covered 1,200 square miles of ocean floor, 3 miles beneath the surface. Commander Jack McNish, Halibut's commanding officer, directed the operation from a cramped control room where technicians monitored grainy video feeds from cameras that had never been designed to operate at such depths. Conditions were impossible. Zero visibility, crushing pressure that damaged equipment on every deployment. Underwater terrain broken by volcanic ridges, seamounts, and deep trenches that made navigation treacherous. The remote cameras could see perhaps 20 feet in the darkness, using powerful lights that drained batteries in hours. Every search run required surfacing, recharging equipment, and diving again. On August 20th, during the mission's 39th Deep Ocean Survey run, Halibut's cameras captured something that made every technician in the control room fall silent. A conning tower, Soviet markings still visible through years of deep ocean corrosion, rising from the darkness like a tombstone. The submarine lay broken at 16,400 feet. Its pressure hull ruptured midway between the conning tower and the stern bow section, separated from the rest of the vessel and lying 50 feet away. But remarkably, much of K-129 remained intact. The conning tower stood upright, its periscope still extended. The missile compartment appeared structurally sound, the outer hull protecting the precious cargo inside. The entire forward section, containing the control room, crew quarters, and critical systems, rested at an angle on the muddy ocean floor. Halibut spent 3 more days photographing the wreckage from every angle. The images revealed damage patterns consistent with an internal explosion, not external attack. Blast marks radiated from the missile compartment. The hull had blown outward, not inward. Whatever killed K-129 had come from inside. The photographs landed on President Lyndon Johnson's desk on August 28th, accompanied by a proposal from CIA Director Richard Helms that was simultaneously brilliant and insane. Recover the submarine, lift it from the ocean floor, bring it to the surface before the Soviets realized where it had sunk. The proposal violated every principle of deep ocean engineering. No one had ever attempted to lift anything remotely this size from such depths. The submarine weighed approximately 2,000 tons. The water pressure at 16,400 feet exceeded 7,000 pounds per square inch. Any lifting cables strong enough to handle the load would weigh more than the submarine itself. Any recovery vessel would need to remain stationary for weeks or months while Soviet surveillance ships patrolled the area. Standard naval salvage doctrine said it was impossible. Marine engineers said it was suicide. Oceanographers said the technology didn't exist, but the prize was worth any cost. Soviet nuclear missiles, encryption systems, intelligence that could shift the strategic balance of the Cold War. The operation received its code name in September 1968, Project Azorian. And to pull off the greatest theft in naval history, the CIA needed one thing the Soviets would never suspect: a cover story so bizarre, so perfectly implausible, that Soviet intelligence would accept it as truth. They needed the world's most eccentric billionaire, a man so strange, so unpredictable, that building a 618-foot ship to mine manganese nodules from the ocean floor would seem perfectly reasonable. Howard Hughes was about to become the CIA's perfect cover story, and the Soviets would never see it coming. November 1968, a penthouse suite on the 9th floor of the Desert Inn, Las Vegas, Nevada. Howard Robard Hughes Jr., once the richest man in America, hadn't been photographed in public for 8 years. The billionaire industrialist who had dated Hollywood actresses, broken aviation speed records, and built an aerospace empire now lived in a single darkened room, watching the same movies on endless repeat, conducting business through Mormon bodyguards who served as his only contact with the outside world. He was 63 years old, dangerously thin, and the CIA was about to make him the centerpiece of the most expensive covert operation in American history. Carl Duckett, CIA Deputy Director for Science and Technology, made the approach through Robert Mayhew, Hughes's personal liaison who handled the billionaire's affairs from an office 5 floors below. The proposal was straightforward: lend Hughes' name to a deep ocean mining operation that would serve as cover for recovering a Soviet submarine. Hughes would never have to appear in public. His companies wouldn't be involved in actual operations. The CIA would handle everything. All they needed was the Hughes name and his reputation for pursuing bizarre technological ventures that made other billionaires look conservative by comparison. Hughes agreed in less than 48 hours. For a man who spent years deliberating over business decisions, the speed shocked even Mayhew. But Hughes saw it differently. The CIA wanted his name, not his participation. He could remain invisible while his legend did the work. Some historians believe Hughes saw it as patriotic duty. Others suggest he recognized that maintaining close CIA relationships protected his numerous defense contracts. Either way, by December 1968, the cover story was in place. Global Marine Development Inc., a Hughes-owned company specializing in deep ocean drilling, would build a revolutionary new ship designed to mine manganese nodules from the Pacific Ocean floor. These potato-sized mineral deposits, rich in nickel, copper, and cobalt, lay scattered across the abyssal plain at depths exceeding 15,000 feet. Several mining companies had already expressed interest in developing extraction technology. A Hughes venture into deep-sea mining would surprise exactly no one. The beauty of the cover story lay in its technical plausibility. Deep ocean mining actually required most of the same technology needed to recover a submarine: precise positioning systems, heavy lift capabilities, pressure-resistant equipment, and a vessel that could maintain station-keeping in the open ocean for weeks at a time. The CIA budgeted $350 million for construction. In 1970 dollars, that was more than the entire annual budget of the National Science Foundation. It was the most expensive ship ever built for any purpose, military or civilian. And every dollar was justified by what they planned to build. The ship's official designation was USNS Hughes Glomar Explorer, 618 feet long, 115 feet wide at the beam, displacing 63,300 tons fully loaded. Sun Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in Chester, Pennsylvania received the contract in January 1971, with strict instructions that the vessel's true purpose remain classified at the highest levels. The exterior design looked relatively conventional: a standard deep-sea drilling ship with a tall derrick amidships, crew quarters forward, machinery spaces aft. From satellite images or aerial reconnaissance, Glomar Explorer appeared to be exactly what Hughes claimed, an expensive but plausible mining vessel. The interior told a different story. Running through the center of the ship from keel to main deck was a moon pool, a massive rectangular opening 199 feet long and 74 feet wide that allowed direct access to the ocean below. Heavy doors on the bottom could seal the opening, creating a dry work area that could be flooded when needed. This wasn't unusual for deep ocean vessels. What was unusual was that this moon pool was designed to conceal a 2,000-ton Soviet submarine. Mounted on a gimbal above the moon pool was a derrick tower rising 254 feet above the waterline. This wasn't a drilling derrick. It was a heavy lift crane capable of supporting 20 million pounds of tensile load, designed to raise and lower a pipe string nearly 3 miles long through ocean depths where water pressure would crush conventional equipment. The pipe string itself was an engineering marvel. 60-foot sections of special steel pipe, each weighing 20 tons, connected end to end to form a continuous tube extending from the ship to the ocean floor. Each connection had to maintain perfect alignment and seal under extreme pressure. The entire string would weigh more than 8,000 tons when fully deployed. A computer-controlled positioning system would keep the ship stable within feet of a fixed point, while currents tried to push a vessel the size of 2 football fields off station. But the most remarkable piece of technology wasn't the ship or the pipe string. It was what would hang at the bottom of that string, waiting in the darkness 16,400 feet below the surface. Lockheed Missiles and Space Company received a classified contract in March 1970 to design what internal CIA documents referred to as the capture vehicle. Engineers called it Clementine. When you saw it, you understood why. The capture vehicle looked like something from science fiction. A massive steel claw, 179 feet long and 90 feet wide, built from high-strength steel and titanium alloys that could withstand crushing deep ocean pressure. 8 curved fingers, each 60 feet long, hydraulically operated, designed to close around a submarine hull like a hand grasping a cigar. The fingers were hollow, packed with flotation foam to offset some of the submarine's weight. Hydraulic rams powerful enough to lift small buildings would drive the closing mechanism. Arrays of high-intensity lights and acoustic positioning systems would allow operators 3 miles above to see and maneuver Clementine with precision measured in inches. The entire capture vehicle weighed 1,800 tons. It had its own power systems, hydraulic plants, and control computers that could operate independently if communications with the surface failed. Raymond Feldman, Lockheed's senior engineer on the project, designed systems with triple redundancy. A single hydraulic failure couldn't be allowed to doom a mission that would cost more than some nations' defense budgets. He later admitted to colleagues that he woke up at night wondering if a single seal failure would waste 6 years of work and $350 million. The pressure, both literal and figurative, was crushing. Western Gear Corporation in Everett, Washington designed the pipe handling system that would lower and raise Clementine. Each 60-foot pipe section had to be threaded onto the string, torqued to precise specifications, then lowered through the moon pool. The process would repeat 280 times to reach full depth. On the return journey, each section would be removed, inspected, and stored. The entire deployment or recovery cycle would take days, during which the ship couldn't move, couldn't seek shelter if weather turned violent, couldn't escape if Soviet surveillance vessels decided to investigate too closely. The ship's dynamic positioning system used 4 massive propellers, 2 forward, 2 aft, controlled by computers that processed data from acoustic transponders planted on the ocean floor. The system could hold Glomar Explorer's position within 30 feet of a fixed point, even in 20-foot seas. This was technology that didn't exist in any other vessel afloat. The Navy's best submarines couldn't station keep with that precision. Construction began in April 1971. Shipyard workers at Sun Shipbuilding were told they were building a mining vessel. Only senior engineers with top-secret clearances knew the truth. The CIA stationed security officers throughout the facility, monitoring conversations, screening visitors, ensuring no details leaked to Soviet intelligence. The Soviets were watching. KGB officers tracked construction progress through satellite imagery and paid informants. But the cover story held. Soviet intelligence reports from 1971-1973 categorized Glomar Explorer as American deep-sea mining vessel commercial project, low strategic priority. The idea that Hughes, an eccentric billionaire known for bizarre business ventures, was building an expensive ship to mine rocks from the ocean floor seemed perfectly consistent with his history. By June 1972, Glomar Explorer was 80% complete. Clementine, assembled in secret at Lockheed's facility in Redwood City, California, was ready for testing. The pipe string, manufactured by 7 different companies, none of which knew what the other 6 were building, was being assembled at a CIA-controlled facility. Then everything nearly fell apart. On June 5, 1972, a Hughes aircraft employee named Michael Gray walked into a newspaper office with documents suggesting that Glomar Explorer wasn't a mining ship at all. Gray worked in procurement and had seen requisitions for equipment that didn't match any known mining project. Hydraulic systems rated for pressures no manganese operation would ever encounter. Titanium components that cost 10 times what mining economics could justify. He didn't know about K-129, didn't know about the capture vehicle, but he knew the ship's capabilities far exceeded what any mining operation required. CIA security officers intercepted Gray before he could publish anything. The documents were seized under national security provisions. Gray was offered a choice: face prosecution under espionage laws, or accept a quiet payment and lifetime non-disclosure agreement. He chose the latter, but the incident revealed how fragile the cover story actually was. Too many people knew pieces of the truth. Eventually, someone would assemble enough pieces to reveal the whole picture. The CIA decided they had to move faster. Glomar Explorer would deploy in 1974, ready or not. Clementine would get one abbreviated test in controlled waters, then be shipped to the target site. The mission window was closing. Soviet naval activity in the Pacific was increasing. Intelligence suggested the Soviets might be planning their own deep ocean survey of the area where K-129 had vanished. On March 23, 1973, Glomar Explorer completed sea trials. The ship performed flawlessly. Dynamic positioning held rock steady. The heavy lift system handled test loads exceeding design specifications. Clementine's hydraulics cycled through 50 successful open-close sequences. They were ready. The most sophisticated salvage vessel ever built would soon set sail for a graveyard 16,400 feet below the Pacific, carrying technology that didn't officially exist to steal a submarine the Soviets didn't know America had found. And 1,500 miles from the target site, Soviet intelligence vessels were beginning to notice something interesting. That strange Hughes mining ship was heading toward deep ocean where there were no manganese nodules worth mining. July 4, 1974. The Pacific Ocean, 1,560 miles northwest of Hawaii. The Hughes Glomar Explorer arrived at the coordinates on Independence Day, deliberately chosen by CIA planners for symbolic reasons. The ship had traveled 3,008 nautical miles from Long Beach, crossing the Pacific in relative secrecy, though Soviet surveillance satellites had tracked its progress with increasing interest. But arriving at the coordinates was only step one. The real test was about to begin. The ship's crew, some CIA employees, some hired civilian workers who believed the cover story about manganese mining, and some specially trained deep ocean specialists began positioning the vessel over the exact spot where K-129 rested 16,400 feet below. The dynamic positioning system engaged, its 4 massive propellers responding to invisible acoustic signals from transponders on the ocean floor. The ship held position within 30 feet of the target, rock steady despite wind and current. They had arrived in silence. But within hours, silence became impossible. A Soviet surveillance trawler, the Chazma, appeared on the horizon at 0600 hours on July 5th. The intelligence ship, bristling with electronic monitoring equipment, positioned itself 15 nautical miles from Glomar Explorer and began conducting what the Soviets officially described as routine hydrographic surveys. In reality, every Soviet intelligence asset in the Pacific had been alerted. The Americans were doing something in open ocean where nothing of commercial value existed. Soviet Naval Command, still searching for K-129, wanted to know exactly what. The CIA had prepared for this. Glomar Explorer's crew began broadcasting radio transmissions describing their deep ocean mining operations. They deployed surface equipment that looked exactly like manganese collection apparatus. Mariner's guides were distributed, showing the fictional nodule fields in the target area. Everything was designed to bore Soviet observers into dismissive compliance. But the Chazma wasn't fooled by the surface activity. What the Soviets didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have suspected, was that the real operation was happening 3 miles beneath the ocean. On August 1, 1974, after 28 days of preparation and positioning, the Hughes Glomar Explorer began lifting K-129 off the seafloor. The process started with a test deployment. The pipe string, made up of 280 separate 60-foot sections of specially forged steel, began its journey through the moon pool. The first sections connected smoothly, threaded and torqued to precise specifications. Each connection had to seal perfectly. One imperfect thread at this depth would cause catastrophic failure when water pressure hit 7,000 pounds per square inch. Each joint was hand-inspected before the next section was connected by experienced deepwater technicians. There was no margin for error, no second chances at this depth. The pipe descended slowly, one section every 15 minutes. The numbers showed on screens in the control room: 500 feet, 1,000 feet, 3,000 feet, 8,000 feet. The water outside transitioned from blue to green to absolute black. At 15,000 feet, the last section connected. The pipe string stretched nearly 3 miles from ship to ocean floor, a continuous column of steel that had never been assembled or deployed in any ocean before. At the bottom, Clementine waited in the darkness. The capture vehicle's operator, 45 miles away in a control room aboard Glomar Explorer, began the most delicate maneuver anyone had ever attempted at that depth. He couldn't see Clementine directly. He operated the vehicle using sonar data, acoustic imaging, and video feeds that showed him barely 20 feet through the murky water. The images were grainy, delayed by milliseconds of transmission time, inadequate for precision work at this scale. But precision was everything. Slowly, hydraulic lines that had never operated at this pressure began to move. The 8 60-foot fingers of Clementine extended, spreading open like a metal hand reaching out of the darkness. The targeting system used acoustic positioning to align Clementine's center with K-129's conning tower. Drift tolerance, less than 3 feet. Any larger deviation and the submarine would escape the grasp. The first attempt nearly failed. As Clementine descended over K-129, sediment disturbed by the capture vehicle clouded what little visibility the cameras had. The operator lost visual contact for 47 seconds, an eternity when maneuvering a 1,800-ton vehicle with precision measured in inches. He relied entirely on sonar and dead reckoning, moving the fingers by feel, by experience, by the kind of instinct that comes from years of deep ocean work. Then visibility returned. Clementine was perfectly positioned. The operator began the closure sequence. Hydraulic pressures that had been calculated by computers and tested under controlled conditions now faced the reality of crushing deep ocean pressure and the irregular shape of a corroded submarine hull. The fingers began to close. For 3 minutes, nothing seemed to happen. Then the submarine shifted. Clementine had made contact, established its grip, and was beginning to lift. The K-129's nose lifted first. The wreck had been tilted at a 45-degree angle on the ocean floor, its bow section corroded and brittle after 6 years underwater. As the grip tightened, the submarine resisted. Corrosion had fused sections of the hull. Sediment had locked the bow section in place for 6 years. The pressure to lift exceeded design specifications almost immediately. Somewhere in the depths, metal stress was reaching dangerous levels. Miraging steel, the high-strength alloy chosen for Clementine's fingers, is incredibly strong, but has a critical weakness. It becomes brittle under certain conditions, especially during temperature changes and differential pressure loading. As Clementine pulled upward while maintaining its grip during the ascent through layers of water with different densities and pressures, the fingers were being subjected to stresses their designers had underestimated. Aboard Glomar Explorer, engineers monitoring the hydraulic data watched the pressure climb with growing concern. The submarine section weighed more than calculated. The sediment gripping the stern section was stronger than predicted. The differential pressures between the deep ocean and the rising column of water were creating forces that engineering models hadn't fully anticipated. Something wasn't matching the predictions. Then suddenly, K-129 broke free. The submarine's nose section wrenched upward, and Clementine's grip solidified. The pressure readings stabilized. The lift had begun. The ascent took hours. Each 60 feet of the 16,400-foot journey required bringing the pipe string up in increments. Every pipe section had to be disconnected at the top, the string paid out to the next joint, then that joint disconnected, lifted out of the water, and placed in the storage system. 280 separate operations, 280 opportunities for failure. The submarine rose through the darkness. 15,000 feet, 10,000 feet, 5,000 feet. The Soviet Chazma circled the Glomar Explorer at 8 knots, monitoring every electromagnetic signal, every change in the ship's position. Soviet Naval Command was receiving real-time intelligence updates. Something was definitely happening. The question was whether the Soviets understood what. At 2,000 feet below the surface, the stress on Clementine reached its maximum. The submarine was being dragged upward through water layers of different densities, through pressure zones that created complex forces on the capture vehicle. The metal fingers that had gripped the K-129 on the ocean floor at crushing pressures were now experiencing a completely different kind of stress. The differential force between the extreme depth below and the reducing pressure as the section rose. The metal began to fail. At 1,200 feet, Clementine's grip weakened. Miraging steel, for all its strength, has a brittleness threshold. The combination of extreme tensile load, differential pressure, and the temperature gradients experienced during ascent created conditions that the material couldn't tolerate. The hydraulic system detected the failure through pressure anomalies, but the operator didn't realize what was happening until the submarine began to slide. The radio crackled. "We're losing her." At 800 feet from the surface, less than 300 meters from the moment of complete success, Clementine's grip failed catastrophically. Two-thirds of the captured section, estimated at 2,000 to 2,500 tons, suddenly went into free fall. The plunge took 52 seconds. The submarine section plummeted back through 800 feet of water, accelerating toward the ocean floor, 16,349 feet below. Two-thirds of the recovered material, including the fire control systems, the cryptographic machines that operated the submarine's secret communications and sophisticated navigation systems, fell back into darkness. On the surface, aboard Glomar Explorer, the operation that had taken 6 years of planning consumed 350 million risked exposure to Soviet sensors and brought the CIA closer to the greatest intelligence haul of the Cold War, collapsed in less than a minute of catastrophic failure. But not all was lost. The forward section, the bow of K-129 containing the conning tower, navigation equipment, and a portion of the control room, remained in Clementine's remaining grip. It was smaller than the lost section, only 38 feet of submarine hull instead of the anticipated 100-plus feet. But it was salvageable. Clementine still held the bow. At 600 feet, the nose section broke the surface for the first time since 1968. Soviet observers on the Chazma watched in confusion as an enormous piece of corroded metal broke through the water, dripping brine and sediment from the ocean floor. The conning tower was unmistakable to anyone trained in recognizing Soviet submarine architecture. Aboard Glomar Explorer, lines attached to Clementine hauled the submarine nose toward the moon pool. The recovered section was 38 feet long and weighed approximately 2,000 tons. Inside the salvaged portion lay 2 nuclear-tipped torpedoes, weapons that contained classified warhead designs and detonation systems that would take intelligence analysts months to fully understand. Some of the submarine's cryptographic machines, navigation systems, equipment that American engineers and codebreakers desperately wanted to examine. And in the compartments that had been sealed since 1968, 6 bodies, Soviet submariners who had died 6 years earlier and were about to receive their first real goodbye. The recovered section was secured in the moon pool just after 1,900 hours on August 8, 1974. The mission wasn't a complete success. The most critical intelligence, portions of the fire control systems, and sophisticated navigational equipment lay 2 miles below in the darkness, scattered across the ocean floor. The Soviets knew something had happened, though they would take years to understand what. But American engineers and intelligence analysts now held pieces of the K-129. And in those pieces lay answers that would transform American understanding of Soviet submarine capabilities, their encryption methods, and their operational procedures. As Glomar Explorer began its journey back to Hawaii, the Soviet Chazma followed, still confused, still watching, still unable to admit to its superiors in Moscow that an American mining ship had just accomplished something the Soviet Navy couldn't comprehend. And somewhere on the ocean floor, 100 feet of Soviet submarine, carrying the answers to questions the CIA most wanted answered, lay in the darkness, waiting for an attempt that would never come. March 17, 1975, Long Beach, California. The classified satellite photographs and intelligence reports sat locked in safes marked "Secret Eyes Only" throughout CIA headquarters, Pentagon intelligence offices, and the White House Situation Room. Project Azorian existed only in shadow. Fewer than 500 people on the planet knew the truth. Even fewer understood its implications. But secrets have a half-life, and this one was about to decay. The Hughes Glomar Explorer had returned to Long Beach in September 1974, slipping back into harbor with the same quiet discretion with which she had departed. The recovered submarine section had been transported to secure facilities under armed guard. Intelligence analysts began the painstaking work of cataloging, photographing, and studying every square inch of salvaged equipment. Submarine manuals, once property of the Soviet Navy, now sat in CIA reading rooms. Nuclear-tipped torpedoes were dissected by weapons engineers who had spent careers trying to understand Soviet technology. For 5 months, the secret held. Then, on February 7, 1975, the Los Angeles Times published a small article connecting pieces of a puzzle that no one was supposed to notice. A missing Hughes memo, a burglarized office, unusual documents in an insurance claim file, a billionaire's reclusive behavior, and mentions of a deep-sea mining venture that made no economic sense. The article was brief and cautious, but journalist Harriet Ann Philippi had stumbled onto something extraordinary. She continued investigating, reaching out to other reporters, comparing notes, filling in gaps. The Los Angeles Times editors understood they had uncovered something massive, but they also understood the stakes. They approached the CIA directly, asking the agency to confirm details before publication. The CIA tried to suppress the story. Press officers denied everything. Agency lawyers sent letters warning about national security implications. But the story was already spreading through Washington's journalistic underground. By March 18, 1975, investigative journalist Jack Anderson, one of America's most aggressive reporters, a man with sources throughout the intelligence community, broke the story nationally. His syndicated column appeared in hundreds of newspapers. His radio report reached millions of Americans. Anderson described the Hughes connection, the Glomar Explorer, the Soviet submarine, the 1968 sinking, the salvage attempt, and most damaging of all, the fact that it had actually worked. The CIA had actually raised a Soviet submarine from the ocean floor. The cover story about manganese mining had been precisely that, a cover. Howard Hughes, eccentric billionaire, had been an unwitting patsy for the intelligence community. The next day, the New York Times published even more details. The secret was unraveling live on television and in newspapers across the country. CIA Director William Colby received the news in real time, watching the story spread across the national media with the helplessness of a man whose life's work, 6 years of operational security, an intelligence triumph of unprecedented scale, was being dismantled by journalists with a phone line and a deadline. The White House went into crisis mode. President Gerald Ford convened an emergency cabinet meeting. Secretary of Defense James Schlesinger sat across from CIA Director William Colby. National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger joined via secure phone. The question was simple and terrifying. What do we do now? The answer came from an unexpected source, the CIA's legal department. The agency's Associate General Counsel, working under a classified pseudonym, proposed something unprecedented. Since the project was still classified, and since the very existence of certain records was itself a state secret, the CIA would not officially confirm or deny that Project Azorian had ever existed. They would not acknowledge the Glomar Explorer's true purpose. They would refuse to confirm that the Hughes submarine recovery had occurred, all while the entire nation now knew exactly what it was. The response was crafted with meticulous legal precision and would eventually be released as, "We can neither confirm nor deny the existence of the information requested, but hypothetically, if such data were to exist, the subject matter would be classified and could not be disclosed." It was simultaneously an admission and a denial, a confession hidden in obfuscation. The government would not officially confirm Project Azorian's existence, would not admit to the submarine recovery, would not acknowledge anything, all while knowing that acknowledgement was now unnecessary. The story had spread too far. The phrase, "neither confirm nor deny," became known as the Glomar response. It would become precedent in American law, cited in FOIA requests for decades to come. Government agencies facing embarrassing revelations would adopt this same non-answer answer. The Supreme Court would affirm its legality. But it all started here in March 1975, when a desperate intelligence agency faced the prospect of total exposure and chose evasion over truth. The Soviets learned the truth not from official channels, but from newspapers and television reports. For 7 years, Moscow had assumed K-129 had been destroyed by internal explosion, lost without the Americans knowing anything about it. They had maintained that fiction in memorials and classified reports. Soviet families had been told their relatives died in an unknown disaster. Now, reading American newspapers and intercepting CIA communications, Soviet leadership understood what had happened. American intelligence had found their submarine. American engineers had raised it. American technicians had examined Soviet weapon systems, studied Soviet encryption, photographed classified Soviet technology. The response came immediately. By late June 1975, Soviet naval vessels had been dispatched to the recovery site 1,560 miles northwest of Hawaii. Not search vessels, not investigation ships, combat vessels equipped for war. The message was unmistakable. Any further American salvage operations would be physically opposed. The Soviet Union was claiming ownership of its sunken property, and they would enforce that claim with military force. President Ford made the decision on June 26, 1975. No second salvage mission. The Hughes Glomar Explorer would never return to the recovery site. The remaining two-thirds of K-129, still lying on the ocean floor 16,400 feet below, would stay there forever. But before the operation was officially terminated, there remained one final act of Cold War humanity that would eventually become known, though not until years later. Among the salvaged material brought aboard Glomar Explorer in August 1974 had been 6 bodies. 6 Soviet submariners who had died 6 years earlier when their submarine sank, their bodies preserved in the cold darkness of the deep ocean. The recovered section of K-129 had been a tomb. Now, aboard an American vessel surrounded by American intelligence officers and military personnel, these 6 men, sailors in a foreign navy, dead enemies in a Cold War that still raged, faced a question that protocol had never anticipated. What do we do with the dead? Standard procedure dictated cremation and disposal. Dump the bodies in the Pacific and deny everything. Let the Soviets wonder forever. Let Moscow assume the remains had been lost to the depths. But someone aboard Glomar Explorer decided differently. On September 4, 1974, in a corner of the Pacific Ocean 1,500 miles from the nearest land, a formal military funeral was conducted. 6 Soviet sailors wrapped in Soviet naval ensigns that had been preserved among the salvage materials were committed to the sea with full military honors. The ceremony was filmed by CIA photographers. Prayers were offered. The bodies were committed to the deep. An American military band had not been present. No formal U.S. military ceremony had occurred in the official record. It was simple. It was respectful. It was, under the circumstances of the Cold War and the ongoing global tension, an act of profound grace. The film of this burial at sea remained classified for 18 years. In 1992, 8 years after the Cold War ended, CIA Director Robert Gates authorized release of the burial footage to the Russian government. The video was presented to Russian officials as proof that the United States, despite the grave moral stakes and strategic tensions of the moment, had treated 6 fallen Soviet sailors with dignity. Some Russian families finally learned what had happened to their fathers and brothers. Not much, not everything, but at least they knew the final act had been one of respect. Project Azorian, the greatest intelligence coup of the Cold War, had accomplished something remarkable. It had proven that American engineering could achieve the impossible. It had demonstrated that the CIA could conduct an operation of staggering complexity in absolute secrecy. It had recovered intelligence that transformed American understanding of Soviet capabilities. And in its final act, it had shown that even in the depths of the Cold War, even when nations were ideological enemies, humans could recognize the universal dignity of the dead. The Hughes Glomar Explorer was eventually sold for scrap. Howard Hughes died 6 years later, still in hiding, still observing the silence he had promised the CIA. The recovered K-129 materials were analyzed for decades, yielding intelligence secrets that remained classified long after the Cold War ended. And on the ocean floor, 16,400 feet below the Pacific, the remaining two-thirds of K-129 settled into silence. The missiles that had triggered a 6-year covert operation, the fire control systems that had cost $350 million, and countless hours of engineering genius to recover. The answers to questions that drove American intelligence officers to the brink of the possible. All of it rested in darkness, where no one would ever see it again. The greatest theft never completed. The deepest secret that could no longer be kept. The enduring proof that even superpowers locked in existential conflict could be bound by a single shared belief: the dead deserve respect. The phrase, neither confirm nor deny, would live on long after the Cold War ended. Journalists and FOIA requesters would discover that government agencies had adopted this same non-answer to avoid accountability. The Supreme Court would affirm its legality. But its origin, born from necessity on a classified ship in the Pacific, remained secret for decades, until it wasn't. And when the world finally learned the story of how a billionaire, a claw, and $350 million of American ingenuity had tried to steal the Soviet Union's secrets, even the Cold War's fiercest adversaries could agree on one thing: sometimes, history turns out to be stranger than any spy novel ever written. August 8, 1974, Long Beach, California. The Hughes Glomar Explorer docked in silence, her moon pool sealed, her greatest secret locked behind massive steel doors. Inside were 38 feet of Soviet submarine, 2 nuclear weapons, cryptographic materials, fire control systems, classified documents that 6 years of planning and $350 million in secret funding had been designed to recover. But incomplete success tastes like failure. Two-thirds of K-129 remained on the ocean floor, 16,400 feet below the Pacific. The 3 R-21 missiles, the main fire control systems, the majority of the 98-man crew, their remains still entombed in compartments now sealed by pressure and distance. The most valuable intelligence lay beyond reach, lost in darkness that had swallowed the submarine and would never release it again. President Ford made the decision official 10 months later. No second salvage mission. Soviet naval vessels were approaching the recovery site. The secret was exposed, not all at once, but in fragments that journalists were piecing together. By mid-1975, the world knew what had happened. There would be no return to the abyss. But before the operation officially ended, there was one final act. On September 4, 1974, aboard the Glomar Explorer, 6 bodies were recovered from the bow section of K-129. They had been dead for 6 years, preserved in the cold darkness of the deep ocean. Soviet sailors, enemy combatants, young men whose names were recorded in classified files, whose families had been told only that their relatives were missing, lost at sea, presumed dead without details or confirmation. Aboard an American intelligence ship, surrounded by CIA operatives and Navy personnel, these 6 men were wrapped in Soviet naval ensigns. A ceremony was conducted, not formally documented in any official record, not publicly acknowledged, not officially sanctioned, but it happened. Prayers were offered in Russian, in English, in the moment. The bodies were committed to the sea with full military honors. A CIA photographer recorded every second. The film would remain classified for 18 years. When Robert Gates, then CIA director, finally authorized its release in 1992, 8 years after the Cold War ended, he would present it to Russian Federation officials with a simple explanation: "We treated your fallen sailors with dignity, even then, even during the Cold War, even when they were our enemies." Some Russian families finally learned what had happened to their fathers and brothers. Not everything, but at least they knew the ending had been respectful. What the Americans learned from the recovered section transformed their understanding of Soviet naval power. The fire control systems were disappointingly primitive, mechanical, hydraulic, outdated. American engineers examined every component and realized that Soviet submarine technology was a full generation behind what American intelligence had feared. This meant American submarines possessed a tactical advantage so significant that it immediately influenced Cold War strategy and nuclear targeting plans. The 2 torpedoes revealed Soviet warhead design. American weapons experts spent months analyzing metallurgy, explosive characteristics, detonation mechanisms. Each detail shifted American assessments of Soviet nuclear capability, not usually upward, but backward, correcting previous overestimates. But the intelligence that truly mattered lay in partially degraded, partially water-damaged codebooks found among the salvage materials. Soviet cryptographers had encrypted thousands of messages sent across the Pacific Fleet between 1968 and 1974, sailors' communications, commander reports, tactical data, strategic assessments, years of intelligence recorded on radio frequencies, intercepted by American listening stations, stored in classified vaults, completely unreadable without the encryption key. Now the CIA held pieces of that key, not complete information, partial, fragmented, but enough. American signals intelligence analysts realized they could apply these partial codebook references to previously intercepted Soviet communications. Messages that had been encrypted and unreadable for years suddenly yielded their secrets. The Soviets had been broadcasting their tactical thinking directly into American listening posts for 6 years, and now those broadcasts became transparent. The intelligence value was incalculable, but it came with a price that Soviet leadership would pay for the next 15 years of the Cold War. Moscow learned the truth in March 1975, not from official diplomatic channels, but from American newspapers and television broadcasts. For 7 years, they had believed K-129 was lost to internal catastrophe, a mechanical failure, an accident, a tragedy of the deep. Now they learned the truth. American intelligence had found it. Americans had photographed it. Americans had raised a portion of it and examined Soviet military secrets. The shock transformed Soviet military strategy. If K-129 had been found and recovered without Soviet detection, what else had been found? What other sunken submarines might contain classified materials? What secrets lay vulnerable on the ocean floor? The Soviet Navy embarked on a catastrophic arms race against the abyss. They built deep ocean recovery vessels specifically designed to retrieve sunken submarines before American intelligence could reach them. The Akademik Mstislav Keldysh, the academic Boris Petrov, ships that cost billions of rubles to construct, that consumed resources the crumbling Soviet economy couldn't afford, all designed to prevent another Project Azorian. They rewrote submarine operating procedures. If a submarine suffered catastrophic damage, it would be deliberately sunk in trenches too deep for any recovery vessel, American or Soviet. They installed explosive charges designed to destroy classified systems rather than let them fall into enemy hands. They modified construction techniques to make submarines more self-destructing in the event of critical failure. Every ruble spent on these measures was a ruble not spent on feeding the Soviet population. Every engineering project diverted to deep ocean recovery was a project not modernizing the crumbling Soviet industrial base. The American theft had forced the Soviet Union to spend money it didn't have on weapon systems it hoped never to use. And this financial burden, multiplied across a military-industrial complex already strangled by inefficiency and corruption, accelerated the Soviet collapse by years. Howard Hughes died on April 5, 1976. He weighed barely 95 pounds. His organs were failing. His mind was deteriorating. The man who had once broken aviation speed records and built the largest wooden airplane in history spent his final days alone, isolated, his consciousness fragmenting. His role in Project Azorian died with him. No memoirs, no confessions, no official acknowledgement of the billionaire hermit who had provided perfect cover for American espionage. In December 1976, the Hughes Glomar Explorer was sold for scrap. The ship that had cost $500 million to deploy was dismantled. Clementine, the mechanical claw that had gripped the submarine and nearly succeeded, was disassembled. The 280 sections of specially forged pipe string, the engineering marvel that had extended 3 miles through crushing darkness, were cut into pieces and sold for scrap metal. The technology vanished. Only the classified materials remained. On March 18, 1975, the world learned the truth from journalist Jack Anderson's broadcast. The CIA had stolen a Soviet submarine. Howard Hughes had provided cover. The operation had succeeded partially and failed spectacularly. The secret that had been kept for 6 years was now national news. The government's response became as famous as the operation itself. When pressed for official comment, the CIA offered a response that would define government secrecy for the next 50 years. The United States government can neither confirm nor deny the existence of the information requested, but, hypothetically, if such data were to exist, the subject matter would be classified and could not be disclosed. The phrase, neither confirm nor deny, became the Glomar response. The Supreme Court upheld it as legally valid. Every federal agency adopted it. FOIA officers used it. Newspapers encountered it. Generations of Americans learned that sometimes the government's answer to a question about classified operations was not yes, not no, but an elaborate statement of absolute non-confirmation that simultaneously confirmed everything. The entire legal framework traces back to one intelligence disaster in March 1975, when a desperate CIA faced exposure and chose strategic ambiguity over truth. December 18, 1992. A conference room at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. Robert Gates held a Soviet submarine Bell, recovered from K-129 18 years earlier and kept classified for all that time. Russian Federation officials sat across from him, representing a nation no longer enemy, but not yet fully friend. Gates placed the Bell on the table. "This came from your K-129, he said. The Russian officers didn't move. They understood what the Bell meant. American intelligence had found their submarine. American engineers had raised it from the abyss. American technicians had examined their weapon systems, their encrypted communications, their military secrets. And then America had kept that secret for 7 years. In the same meeting, Gates authorized release of 18-year-old classified film. The video showed a ceremony aboard a ship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. 6 bodies wrapped in Soviet naval ensigns. A burial at sea with full military honors. Some Russian families learned what had happened to their fathers and brothers. Not everything, but at least they knew the final act had been conducted with respect. 50 years later, the remaining 2/3 of K-129 still rests in silence on the ocean floor. The 3 nuclear missiles remain submerged. The main fire control systems sit undisturbed. The remains of the majority of the 98-man crew still lie entombed in sealed compartments. The equipment that represented Soviet strategic power, now corroded by salt and pressure, will likely never be recovered. Project Azorian proved that American technology could achieve the impossible. It proved that the CIA could conduct an operation of staggering complexity in absolute secrecy. It proved that intelligence could be recovered from the deepest, most remote corners of the world's oceans. But it also proved something more profound. Sometimes, the cost of success is knowing that future success becomes impossible. The greatest theft never completed. The deepest secret that could no longer be kept. The enduring proof that even superpowers locked in existential conflict could be bound by one shared belief: the dead deserve respect. And that respect, conducted in darkness far from any observer, in a moment documented only by classified film, became the final legacy of an operation that changed espionage, changed technology, changed how governments speak about secrets, and changed how 2 enemy nations understood their place in the world.